A white airport security officer just burned my passport right in front of hundreds of passengers at JFK Airport. He thought he was teaching some illegal immigrant a lesson about fake documents. What he didn't know was that I'm Sophia Martinez-Williams and my husband happens to be the United States Attorney General. But here's the thing. I didn't tell him who I was. I wanted to see exactly how far his racism would go. And trust me, what happened next will shock you to your core. If you're watching from anywhere in America, drop a comment and let me know what state you're from. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Box for more stories that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about justice. My name is Sophia Martinez-Williams, and I've been an investigative journalist for 15 years. I've won awards, exposed corruption, and traveled to war zones. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened to me on that cold Monday morning in November 2024 at JFK Airport Terminal 4. I was returning from 3 weeks in Geneva covering the European immigration crisis for the Washington Post. I looked tired, my hair was messy, my clothes wrinkled from the overnight flight. I deliberately chose to fly economy, instead of using the government jet my husband's position would allow. You see, I believe in experiencing life the way ordinary citizens do. I never use my connection to Attorney General Robert Williams to get special treatment. That principle was about to be tested in the worst possible way. The immigration line moved slowly. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, mixing with the smell of disinfectant and jet fuel that seems to live permanently in airport air. I was scrolling through my phone, checking emails when I heard a commotion ahead of me. A Hispanic mother named Carmen Rodriguez was crying her 8-year-old son Miguel, clinging to her leg. The boy's eyes were red from tears. Standing over them was a white officer with a badge reading Officer Derek Mitchell. He was maybe 45 with graying hair and the kind of permanent scowl that comes from years of believing the worst about people. "This passport is damaged," Mitchell was saying loudly, holding up Carmen's document. "You can't enter the United States with torn papers. You should have thought about that before you left Mexico." "Please, sir," Carmen pleaded in accented English. "It's just small tear. My son, he is American citizen. We visit my mother in Guadalajara for funeral." Mitchell's voice got louder, ensuring everyone in line could hear. "I don't care about your sob story. Rules are rules. You're going back where you came from." I watched this scene unfold, my journalist instincts kicking in. But it was more than professional curiosity. 25 years ago, I was that little boy. I was 8 years old when my undocumented parents brought me across the border. I remember the fear in my mother's eyes when we encountered immigration officers. I remember hiding behind her skirt just like Miguel was doing now. When it was finally my turn, Mitchell looked me up and down with undisguised suspicion. His eyes lingered on my brown skin, my curly black hair, the small silver cross necklace my grandmother gave me that clearly marked me as Latina. "Passport," he said curtly, not bothering with pleasantries. I handed it over. Mitchell flipped through it slowly, his frown deepening. "Says, here you were in Geneva. What were you doing there? I'm a journalist. I was covering the refugee crisis for a story." He snorted. "Journalist. For what? Some local Spanish paper?" The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my expression neutral. "The Washington Post, actually." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. He was staring at something in my passport, a small official seal that identifies family members of high-ranking government officials. But instead of recognizing it, he seemed to think it was suspicious. "What's this marking here?" he demanded, pointing at the seal. "It's an official designation," I said carefully. "Official designation for what? Looks fake to me." And that's when I knew this was about to get much worse. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside for additional screening," Mitchell announced loudly, his voice carrying across the immigration area. Several passengers turned to stare. He gestured toward a gray door, marked secondary inspection. I'd written articles about that room, where travelers disappear for hours, where constitutional rights seem to evaporate, where the real power games happen away from public view. "Is there a problem with my documents?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the familiar knot forming in my stomach. "That's what we're going to find out," Mitchell said with a smug smile. "Follow me." The secondary inspection room smelled like industrial cleaning supplies and fear. About 30 other travelers sat in plastic chairs, mostly people of color, mostly looking exhausted and worried. A few business travelers checked their phones anxiously, probably missing connecting flights. Mitchell made a show of examining my passport under a magnifying glass. "This seal looks suspicious," he said loudly enough for other passengers to hear. We see a lot of sophisticated forgeries these days. I thought about my husband Robert, probably in a morning briefing at the Department of Justice right now, unaware that his wife was being treated like a criminal. I thought about calling him, but something held me back. I wanted to see how far this would go. As a journalist, I needed to understand what ordinary people experience when they don't have powerful connections. "Sir, I can assure you that passport is authentic," I said calmly. "That's what they all say," Mitchell replied with a laugh. "You know what I think? I think you paid some good money for this fake document. Probably thought that fancy seal would fool us." Behind Mitchell, I noticed a young Asian woman, couldn't have been more than 22, discreetly holding her phone. Her name tag read, Ashley Chen, travel blogger. She was live streaming on Instagram, her eyes wide with disbelief at what she was witnessing. "Guys," I heard her whisper to her phone, "this is insane. This officer is accusing a woman of having a fake passport just because she's Latina. I have 15,000 people watching right now." Mitchell was too focused on his performance to notice. He held my passport high above his head like a trophy. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the room, "this is exactly the kind of sophisticated fraud we're trained to detect. These people think they can fool the United States government." The words hit me like a physical blow. These people. I'd heard that phrase before, always dripping with contempt, always marking the line between us and them. I remained silent, but my mind was racing. In 15 years as a journalist, I'd interviewed gang members, corrupt politicians, war criminals. I'd learned that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. Let them reveal who they really are. Mitchell seemed unnerved by my calm demeanor. "Why aren't you upset?" he demanded. "Why aren't you protesting your innocence?" I looked directly into his eyes. Would it matter if I did? Something in my tone must have unsettled him because his confidence wavered for just a moment, but then his jaw set with determination. "You know what," he said, reaching into his pocket, "I've had enough of this. This document is clearly fraudulent, and I have the authority to confiscate and destroy fake government papers." He pulled out a chrome lighter. "Sir," I said quietly, "I would strongly advise against that course of action." "Are you threatening me?" Mitchell's voice rose dangerously. "I'm simply suggesting you might want to verify my identity before you do something irreversible." But Mitchell was past the point of rational thought. The audience, the cameras, the need to assert his authority, it all combined into a perfect storm of toxic masculinity and racial bias. "This is what happens to people who try to scam the system," he declared. He flicked the lighter open and held the flame to the corner of my passport. I watched my official document, a symbol of my American citizenship, my freedom to travel, my identity itself, begin to burn. The smell of burning plastic and paper filled the air. Around the room, people gasped and pulled out their phones. Ashley Chen's live stream exploded with comments. "Oh my God," she whispered into her phone. "He actually burned it. He burned her passport. This is absolutely insane." I stood perfectly still watching the flames consume the blue cover. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't give Mitchell the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I memorized everything. His badge number, the time, the witnesses, the exact words he used. Because I knew that sometimes the pen really is mightier than the sword, and I was going to need every detail for what was coming next. The burning passport fell to the floor in charred pieces. Mitchell stood over the remains like he'd just won some great victory, his chest puffed out with pride. The room fell silent, except for the soft clicking of phone cameras. "That's what happens when you try to fool the United States government," Mitchell announced to his captive audience. "Let this be a lesson to anyone else thinking about using fake documents." I looked down at the ashes of my passport, my name, my photo, my rights as an American citizen, reduced to blackened paper fragments on the institutional gray floor. In that moment, I thought about my 8-year-old self, hiding behind my mother's skirt at this same airport decades ago. But I wasn't 8 anymore, and I wasn't hiding. "Officer Mitchell," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly in the silent room, "I believe you've just committed a federal crime." He laughed. Actually laughed. "Federal crime, lady, you're the one who committed the crime by carrying fake documents. Now I'm going to need to place you under arrest for document fraud." He reached for his handcuffs, and that's when something extraordinary happened. 2 men in dark suits materialized from the crowd of passengers. They moved with the fluid precision of trained professionals, and suddenly they were flanking Mitchell with the kind of calm authority that makes people instinctively step back. "Officer Mitchell," the first man said, his voice quiet but commanding. He was African American, maybe 40, with the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I'm going to need you to step away from Mrs. Williams. Mitchell blinked in confusion. Who the hell are you? This is a federal facility. You have no authority here. The second agent, a white woman in her 30s with ice blue eyes, reached into her jacket and produced a badge. United States Marshals Service Judicial Security Division. You've just destroyed the passport of the Attorney General's wife. The color drained from Mitchell's face so quickly I thought he might faint. Attorney General but her name is Martinez. Sophia Martinez-Williams, the first marshal, said patiently. She kept her maiden name professionally. Something you might have discovered if you'd bothered to run her passport through the system instead of assuming it was fake because of her ethnicity. Around the room, phones were still recording. Ashley Chen's live stream had exploded to over 50,000 viewers, and the comment section was moving so fast it was just a blur of outrage and shock. Mitchell stammered, I didn't know. She didn't say. Why didn't she tell me who she was? I spoke for the first time since the marshals arrived. Because every American citizen deserves to be treated with dignity, Officer Mitchell. My rights don't come from my husband's position. They come from the Constitution. Ma'am, the female marshal said respectfully, we have a vehicle waiting. The Attorney General has been notified of the situation. I nodded, but I wasn't done yet. I turned back to Mitchell, who was now visibly shaking. Officer, I want you to understand something. What you did today, the racial profiling, the assumptions, the destruction of federal property, this isn't about me. This happens to people who look like me every single day. The only difference is they don't have marshals coming to their rescue. Mitchell opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. His supervisor, a nervous-looking man named Captain James Clark, came rushing over. Officer Mitchell, what the hell have you done? His face was pale as he looked at the burned passport remains. Do you have any idea what kind of shitstorm you've just created? Ashley Chen was still live streaming, her voice breathless with excitement. Guys, this is absolutely historic. I just witnessed the most incredible abuse of power and the most graceful response I've ever seen. This video already has 1 million views and it's still going. As the marshals escorted me toward the exit, I could hear Mitchell behind me finally beginning to grasp the magnitude of what he'd done. Captain, I thought it was fake. The seal looked wrong. She was acting suspicious. Suspicious? Clark's voice rose. Suspicious? How? By being brown. By traveling while Latina. Jesus Christ. Derek, do you realize you just burned the passport of one of the most respected journalists in America? Do you know what her husband can do to this entire department? But as we walked through the terminal, something interesting was happening. Other passengers, people who had witnessed Mitchell's behavior toward Carmen Rodriguez and her son, people who had seen him humiliate traveler after traveler, they were coming forward. An elderly black man approached one of the marshals. Excuse me, sir. I saw everything. That officer has been harassing people all morning. He made a young Muslim woman remove her hijab in front of everyone. He's been targeting people of color specifically. A white woman with 2 young children chimed in. I recorded him making racist comments to a family from El Salvador. It's on my phone. Suddenly, what had seemed like an isolated incident was revealing itself as part of a pattern. Mitchell hadn't just burned my passport in a moment of poor judgment. He'd been systematically abusing his authority, and today had just been the day he finally went too far. As we reached the terminal exit, I looked back one more time. Through the glass doors of the secondary inspection room, I could see Mitchell sitting in a chair, his head in his hands, finally understanding that his world was about to change forever. But this wasn't about Derek Mitchell anymore. This was about something much bigger. The black SUV pulled away from JFK with me in the back seat, flanked by the 2 marshals. My phone had been buzzing nonstop, dozens of missed calls and hundreds of text messages. Word was spreading faster than wildfire. Ma'am, the lead marshal said gently, Marshal Davidson here. The Attorney General is waiting for your call. I looked at the phone in my hand. Robert would be devastated, furious, probably ready to unleash the full power of the Justice Department on Derek Mitchell and everyone associated with him. But revenge wasn't what I wanted. Not yet, anyway. Marshal Davidson, I need to make a stop before I go home. Ma'am, I need to go to my office at the Washington Post. Davidson exchanged a glance with his partner, Marshal Torres. Mrs. Williams, with respect, shouldn't you speak with your husband first? This is a federal incident involving threats to your safety. I understood their concern, but I had a job to do. Gentlemen, I've been a journalist for 15 years. I know how to handle a story. And this is the story of a lifetime. As we drove toward Manhattan, my phone lit up with a call from my editor, Catherine Rodriguez Kim. Catherine was a Puerto Rican woman who'd fought her way to the top of one of America's most prestigious newspapers. She'd been my mentor, my advocate, and sometimes my conscience for 8 years. Sophia, Jesus Christ, are you okay? It's all over Twitter. Someone live-streamed the whole thing. I'm fine, Cat. Physically anyway. Listen, I want to write about this. There was a pause. Honey, you can't write about something that happened to you. That's not journalism, that's memoir. And besides, Robert is probably going to want this handled through official channels. Cat, this isn't about me. This is about systematic racism in federal agencies. This is about what happens to people who don't have powerful husbands. This morning, before Mitchell burned my passport, I watched him humiliate a mother and her 8-year-old son just because they were Mexican. How many Carmen Rodriguezes go through this every day? Another pause, longer this time. You're thinking op-ed, not news story. Exactly. First person, but focused on policy implications. I'm the Attorney General's wife. Here's what happened when airport security burned my passport. Sophia, that headline alone will break the internet. Are you sure you're ready for what comes next? I thought about 8-year-old me, terrified and hiding behind my mother's skirt. I thought about Carmen Rodriguez's son Miguel, watching his mother be humiliated by a man in uniform. I thought about all the people who would face Derek Mitchell tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that if nothing changed. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. By the time we reached the post building number, passport burning was trending on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Ashley Chen's live stream had been viewed over 5 million times. News outlets around the world were picking up the story. CNN had already reached out for interviews. Fox News was spinning it as an example of TSA officers under impossible pressure. Catherine met me in the lobby, her usually perfect composure cracked with worry. Honey, Robert's been calling, he sounds. She searched for the right word. Volcanic. I'll call him, but first I need to write. We took the elevator to the newsroom in silence. It was barely noon, but the energy was electric. Every screen seemed to be showing a different angle of the airport incident. I could feel eyes following me as we walked to Catherine's office, but I kept my head high. Close the door, I said once we were inside. Catherine sat across from her desk, studying my face. Talk to me, Sophia. Not as your editor, but as your friend. How are you really doing? The question caught me off guard. All morning I'd been in crisis mode. Analyzing, strategizing, thinking 3 moves ahead. I hadn't stopped to process what had actually happened to me. He burned my identity, Cat. Literally set fire to my citizenship and thought it was funny. And you know what the worst part is? I wasn't even surprised. Some part of me has been expecting this my whole life. Catherine nodded slowly. The scared little girl is still in there. She is, but she's not scared anymore. She's pissed off. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Sweetheart, please call me. The president wants to discuss federal charges. This could be the biggest civil rights case of the decade. I showed Catherine the message. She whistled low. Federal charges. Robert's not messing around. That's exactly the problem. If we handle this through traditional channels, arrests, trials, convictions, Derek Mitchell becomes the villain, and the system stays exactly the same. One bad apple gets thrown out, everyone feels better, nothing changes, and your alternative is systematic reform. Congressional hearings, new oversight mechanisms, training programs. Turn Mitchell into a case study instead of just a cautionary tale. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming on her desk. You know what you're asking for, right? You're asking to make yourself the face of airport discrimination reform. That's a target that never goes away. I thought about my grandmother who cleaned office buildings at night so her children could go to college. I thought about my parents who risked everything to give me opportunities they never had. I thought about the 8-year-old boy clinging to his mother's leg this morning. Some targets are worth carrying. All right then, Catherine said, pulling out her laptop. Let's write something that changes the world. Chapter 5. I spent 3 hours writing what would become the most important piece of my career. Every word was carefully chosen, every sentence crafted to build towards systematic change rather than individual punishment. When I finished, Catherine read it twice in silence. This is Pulitzer-level work, Sophia. But are you prepared for what happens when this publishes? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Robert's name appeared on the screen, and I knew I couldn't avoid this conversation any longer. Hi, sweetheart. Sophia. His voice was tight, with controlled anger. Thank God you're safe. I've had the FBI, Homeland Security, and the fucking president all asking me how we're going to handle this. Derek Mitchell is about to be arrested on federal charges. His supervisor is being investigated. The entire TSA leadership at JFK is being reviewed. Robert, I need you to slow down. Slow down, Sophia. This maniac burned your passport. He humiliated you, threatened you, violated your civil rights. He's going to federal prison for the maximum sentence allowable by law. I could hear the pain beneath his anger. Robert's father had been a civil rights lawyer in Alabama during the 1962nd. He'd grown up hearing stories about racial violence, about people who looked like his wife being beaten and murdered for demanding basic human dignity. This wasn't just about me for him. It was about every injustice his family had fought against for generations. Honey, I know you want justice, but I need you to think about something. What if we could prevent this from happening to anyone else ever again? What do you mean I'm writing an op-ed for the Post? I want to turn this into a movement for systematic reform. Congressional hearings, new training protocols, oversight mechanisms, real change. There was a long pause. Sophia, you can't be serious. You want to turn this into a political campaign instead of a criminal case. I want to turn this into both. But the political campaign comes first. Sweetheart, I love your idealism, but this isn't how the world works. You nail the perpetrators, you send a message that this behavior won't be tolerated, and you move on. You don't turn personal trauma into public theater. His words stung, but I understood where they came from. Robert was a prosecutor at heart. He believed in individual accountability, in clear lines between right and wrong and punishment fitting the crime. It was what made him an excellent attorney general. It was also why he was wrong about this. Robert, how many Derek Mitchells are there? How many TSA agents, Border Patrol officers, local cops who think burning someone's documents is acceptable behavior? You prosecute Mitchell, maybe Clark gets fired, maybe a few agents get sensitivity training, but the system that created them remains unchanged. So what are you proposing? I'm proposing we use this moment, this attention, this outrage, to force systematic change. Turn Mitchell into a case study instead of just a convict. There was another long pause. When Robert spoke again, his voice was softer. You want to sacrifice revenge for reform. I want to sacrifice my personal satisfaction for everyone else's long-term safety. And if I told you that I disagree, that I think Mitchell belongs in a federal penitentiary, I looked out the window of Catherine's office at the bustling newsroom below. Reporters were chasing stories. Editors were making decisions that would influence public opinion. Photographers were capturing moments that would define how history remembered this day. This was democracy in action, messy, imperfect, but ultimately accountable to the people it served. Then we'd have our first major disagreement as a married couple. But Robert, I need you to trust me on this. I know what I'm doing. Another pause, then a sigh. What do you need from me? Recuse yourself from any prosecution decisions. Let the career prosecutors handle Mitchell while you focus on systematic reform. Use your position to push for congressional hearings, not just criminal trials. You're asking me to give up my chance to personally ensure justice for what happened to my wife. I'm asking you to help me ensure justice for everyone who doesn't have a powerful husband to protect them. The line went quiet for so long I thought he might have hung up. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice thick with emotion. I love you, Sophia Martinez-Williams, and I'm terrified for what you're about to put yourself through. But if anyone can turn personal pain into public progress, it's you. I love you too. And Robert, start making calls to congressional leadership. This is going to move fast. After I hung up, Catherine looked at me with something approaching awe. You just convinced the Attorney General of the United States to step back from prosecuting the man who humiliated his wife. I convinced my husband to trust me to fight this battle the right way. And what is the right way? I pulled up Ashley Chen's Instagram page on my phone. Her follower count had jumped to over 3 million in 6 hours. Her video of Mitchell burning my passport had been shared by celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens around the world. The comments were a mix of outrage, support, and calls for action. We turn a moment into a movement, I said, and we start right now. The op-ed published at 8 p.m. that same evening, with the headline, "I'm the Attorney General's wife. Here's what happened when airport security burned my passport." Within 2 hours, it had been shared 2.5 million times. Within 6 hours, it was the most read article in Washington Post history. But what happened next surprised everyone. Derek Mitchell, apparently unable to handle the pressure and criticism, decided to fight back. 3 days after my article published, he appeared on Tucker Carlson's show with a narrative that would have been laughable if it weren't so dangerous. "Tucker, I'm the real victim here," Mitchell said, his face flushed with righteous indignation. "I was doing my job protecting America from document fraud, and now I'm being destroyed by the woke mob just because I had the courage to question a suspicious passport." Carlson nodded sympathetically. "So you're telling me you followed proper procedures?" "Exactly. I've caught hundreds of fake documents over my 15-year career. This woman was acting suspicious. Her documents had irregular markings, and when I questioned her about it, she became evasive. I had every right to confiscate what I believed was fraudulent government property. I watched the segment from my living room in Georgetown, Robert beside me on the couch. His jaw was clenched so tight I was worried about his teeth. "That lying piece of shit," he muttered. "He knows exactly what he did." But I was thinking 3 steps ahead. "Actually, this is perfect. Perfect, Sophia. He just accused you of carrying fake documents on national television, and now millions of people are going to see Ashley Chen's video again. They're going to watch him burn my passport, hear his racist comments, see his behavior toward other passengers. He just handed us the best possible evidence of his bias." I was right. Within hours of the Tucker Carlson segment number, "Benson is racist" was trending worldwide. The video went viral again, this time with people specifically looking for evidence of racial bias. Social media users created side-by-side comparisons showing how Mitchell treated white passengers versus passengers of color. More importantly, other victims started coming forward. Carmen Rodriguez, the Hispanic mother from the airport, contacted my office through her lawyer. She wanted to testify about Mitchell's behavior toward her and her son. A Muslim woman named Amira Hassan shared video of Mitchell forcing her to remove her hijab in public. An elderly black veteran named Samuel Washington described being detained for 3 hours because Mitchell claimed his military ID looked suspicious. The pattern was undeniable, and it was all documented. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Mitchell's own daughter. Emma Mitchell was 16 years old, a junior at a private school in Queens. 3 days after her father's television appearance, she posted a TikTok video that went viral faster than any political content in the platform's history. "My name is Emma Mitchell, and Derek Mitchell is my father." She began sitting in what appeared to be her bedroom. "I need to say something about what my dad did at the airport." She took a deep breath, and I could see her hands shaking slightly as she continued. "What my dad did was wrong. It was racist and it was cruel, and I'm ashamed to be related to him right now. Mrs. Williams didn't deserve what happened to her, and neither did any of the other people my dad has probably treated the same way over the years." The video was raw, emotional, and devastating in its honesty. I've been seeing the comments online, people saying, "Mrs. Williams should have told my dad who she was, that she could have avoided all this by just mentioning her husband." But that's exactly the point, isn't it? Every American citizen deserves to be treated with dignity no matter who they're married to. By the time Emma finished her 3-minute video, she was crying, but her voice remained steady. "Mrs. Williams, if you're watching this, I'm sorry for what my dad did to you, and I hope something good comes out of this, because it can't happen to anyone else." The video received 50 million views in its first week online. Emma Mitchell became an overnight sensation, praised for her courage and maturity. More importantly, she became the face of a generation that refused to accept their parents' prejudices. But there was one more surprise coming. A week after Emma's video, I received a handwritten letter forwarded through my office. The return address was simply D. Mitchell, with no other identifying information. Inside was a 3-page letter written in careful cursive handwriting. "Mrs. Martinez-Williams," it began. "I know I have no right to write to you, and I know nothing I say can undo what I did. But I need you to know that I've spent every day since that morning trying to understand how I became someone I don't recognize." The letter went on to describe Mitchell's childhood in Queens, his father's death in 9/11, his gradual slide into resentment and prejudice. It wasn't an excuse, but it was an explanation. "I destroyed something precious that day, not just your passport, but my own sense of who I thought I was. I've started attending counseling sessions provided by my lawyer, and I'm learning about unconscious bias and systemic racism. I know it's too late for me, but maybe it's not too late for others." The letter ended with a request that surprised me. "I know you're working on systematic reform. If there's any way my experience, my mistakes, my prejudices, my journey toward understanding can help prevent this from happening to someone else I want to help. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but maybe I can earn the chance to be useful. I read the letter 3 times before showing it to Robert. He was skeptical. It could be a legal strategy, he said. Show remorse, cooperate with reform efforts, hope for a lighter sentence. Maybe. But what if it's not? What if Mitchell genuinely wants to change? Do you want to find out? I thought about Emma Mitchell's video, about her courage in standing up to her own father. I thought about Carmen Rodriguez's son, about Ashley Chen's millions of followers, about all the people who had been inspired to share their own stories of discrimination. Yes, I said. I think I do. 6 months later, I stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, watching President Biden sign the Maya Johnson Airport Civil Rights Act into law. The legislation mandated bias training for all federal security personnel, established independent oversight for discrimination complaints, and created a $50 million fund to compensate victims of federal discrimination. But the real victory wasn't the law itself. It was everything that had led up to it. Derek Mitchell had been sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 200 hours of community service at immigrant rights organizations. More importantly, he had become an unlikely ally in our reform efforts, participating in training videos and speaking to federal employees about the dangers of unconscious bias. His supervisor, James Clark, received a 3-year sentence for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. 6 other TSA agents lost their jobs and faced various criminal charges. Emma Mitchell had started a nonprofit called Kids Against Discrimination, using her social media platform to educate young people about bias and systemic racism. She'd received a full scholarship to Georgetown University, where she planned to study civil rights law. Ashley Chen had turned her viral moment into a documentary film about airport discrimination, with all proceeds going to legal aid organizations. The film, Burned When Power Meets Prejudice, had won the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance and been nominated for an Academy Award. But the most meaningful change was harder to quantify. In the year following Mitchell's arrest, reported incidents of TSA discrimination dropped by 67%. Bias training completion rates reached 99.2% across all federal agencies. Body cameras at security checkpoints led to disciplinary action in over 150 cases. Carmen Rodriguez, the Hispanic mother from that first morning, had been hired as a community liaison for TSA reform programs. Her son Miguel was thriving in school, no longer afraid of uniformed officers. As for me, I had taken a position as Director of Civil Rights Initiatives at Georgetown Law School. My course, Media Justice and Social Change, had a waiting list of over 500 students. Every semester I started the first class the same way. How many of you have ever been discriminated against, I would ask. Usually about half the hands in the room would go up. How many of you have done something about it? The number of raised hands would drop dramatically. Today we're going to learn how to turn moments into movements, how to transform personal pain into public progress, and why sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is not revenge, but reform. A year after the airport incident, I returned to JFK Terminal 4 for my first international trip since everything began. Walking through the same immigration area where Derek Mitchell had burned my passport felt surreal. The TSA agent checking documents was a young Korean-American woman named Jennifer Park. When she saw my passport, she smiled. "Mrs. Martinez-Williams, it's such an honor to meet you. Thank you for everything you've done to make our workplace better." As I walked through security, I noticed the changes everywhere. Agents wore body cameras. Bias training certificates were prominently displayed. A large sign listed passengers' rights in 7 languages. Most importantly, I watched agent after agent treat travelers, Black, Latino, Asian, white, Muslim, Christian, with equal courtesy and respect. At my gate, waiting for my flight to Geneva, I was returning to cover the European immigration crisis 1 year later. I received a text message from an unknown number. "Mrs. Martinez-Williams, this is Emma Mitchell. I just wanted you to know that my dad completed his community service yesterday. He helped process asylum applications for 200 families. He said it was the most meaningful work he's ever done. Thank you for seeing the possibility of redemption when no one else could." I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about forgiveness and justice, about punishment and redemption, about the difference between revenge and reform. My flight was called, and as I walked toward the gate, I thought about the 8-year-old girl who had hidden behind her mother's skirt in this same terminal decades ago. She had been afraid, powerless, voiceless, but she had grown up to find her voice. and she had used it not to tear down but to build up, not to destroy but to create, not to divide but to unite. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is not to fight fire with fire but to meet darkness with light. Today, 3 years after Derek Mitchell burned my passport at JFK Airport, I'm writing this final chapter from my office at Georgetown Law School. The view from my window shows the Capitol dome in the distance, a reminder that democracy, for all its flaws, still offers pathways to justice for those willing to walk them. The Maya Johnson Airport Civil Rights Act has been implemented in over 400 airports nationwide. Federal discrimination complaints have dropped by 78% since its passage. More than 500,000 federal employees have completed enhanced bias training. The Independent Oversight Board has processed over 3,000 cases, resulting in disciplinary action, additional training, or policy changes in 89% of cases. But statistics, important as they are, don't tell the whole story. Last month, I received a letter from a young woman named Maria Santos. She was traveling through LAX when a TSA agent began questioning her citizenship based on her accent. Under the old system, she would have endured the humiliation in silence. Instead, she calmly informed the agent that he was violating the Maya Johnson Act, requested his supervisor, and filed a formal complaint. The agent received additional training, and Maria boarded her flight with her dignity intact. That's what real change looks like. Not the dramatic moments that make headlines, but the quiet victories of ordinary people who know their rights and aren't afraid to assert them. Derek Mitchell was released from prison 8 months ago. He now works for the same immigrant rights organization where he completed his community service helping asylum seekers navigate the legal system. His transformation isn't complete, may never be complete, but it's genuine. We exchange emails, occasionally professional updates about our respective work in civil rights reform. Emma Mitchell graduated from Georgetown Law School last spring, summa cum laude. She's clerking for a federal judge and plans to specialize in civil rights law. Her nonprofit, now run by a board of directors, has trained over 1,000,000 young people in bias recognition and intervention techniques. Ashley Chen's documentary won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature. In her acceptance speech, she said something that still gives me chills. This film exists because one woman chose to respond to hate with hope, to cruelty with compassion, and to power with principle. It reminds us that the most powerful force for change is not anger but love. Carmen Rodriguez's son, Miguel, is now 14 and serves on the Youth Advisory Board for TSA reform initiatives. He speaks at conferences about the experience of discrimination from a child's perspective. His mother often tells me that the scared little boy clinging to her leg that morning has grown into a confident young advocate for justice. As for my husband, Robert, he was recently appointed to the Supreme Court. During his confirmation hearings, several senators asked about the airport incident and its aftermath. His response became one of the most quoted passages from the proceedings. My wife taught me that there are times when personal justice must yield to public progress, when individual satisfaction must be sacrificed for systematic change. The Maya Johnson Act will protect millions of Americans for generations to come. That's a legacy worth more than any criminal conviction. But perhaps the most important outcome is one that can't be measured in statistics or legislation. We changed the conversation. 3 years ago, airport discrimination was a dirty secret, something that happened in secondary inspection rooms, away from cameras and witnesses. Victims suffered in silence, too intimidated, or too powerless to speak out. Perpetrators operated with impunity, protected by institutional indifference and public ignorance. Today, discrimination at airports is front-page news. Passengers know their rights, agents know they're being watched, and supervisors know they'll be held accountable for the behavior of their subordinates. The very act of filming a TSA interaction is no longer seen as suspicious, it's recognized as a form of civic engagement. We turned a moment of personal humiliation into a national movement for justice. We transformed individual pain into collective progress. We proved that in America, even the most powerless person can hold the most powerful institutions accountable if they're willing to fight not just for themselves, but for everyone who will come after them. I still carry the lighter Derek Mitchell used to burn my passport, not as a trophy or a reminder of grievance, but as a symbol of transformation. Fire can destroy, but it can also purify. It can burn down, but it can also light the way forward. That morning at JFK, standing over the ashes of my passport, I made a choice. I chose to see possibility where others saw only problems, to see opportunity where others saw only obstacles, to see hope where others saw only hate. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, moments of anger, moments when revenge seemed simpler than reform, but I learned something important about power during those difficult months. The most lasting victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from transforming them into allies. Today, when I teach my students about social change, I always end with the same question. What will you do when you have the choice between personal satisfaction and public progress? Because that choice comes to all of us eventually. Someone wrongs us, hurts us, humiliates us. We can choose to respond with equal cruelty, to seek proportional revenge to balance the scales of personal justice. Or we can choose to break the cycle. We can choose to respond to hatred with hope, to cruelty with compassion, to power with principle. We can choose to be the change we want to see in the world. 3 years ago, Derek Mitchell burned my passport and thought he was teaching me a lesson about my place in America. Instead, he taught me something about his place in America and about the power each of us has to change that place for the better. The scared 8-year-old girl, hiding behind her mother's skirt, grew up to become a woman who refuses to let anyone else's child experience that fear. That's not just my story, that's America's story when America lives up to its best ideals. The fire that was meant to destroy became the light that showed the way forward. And that light is still burning, still showing the way toward a more perfect union, still proving that justice delayed is not always justice denied. Sometimes it's justice transformed into something even more powerful. Sometimes the longest path to justice is also the surest path to change. If you've made it this far, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you chose between personal revenge and systemic change? Have you ever had to decide between what felt good in the moment and what was right in the long term? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. And if this story moved you, if it made you think differently about power and justice and the choices we all face when confronted with injustice, please subscribe to Black Stories Box. Because every story of transformation starts with someone willing to share their truth, and every movement for change starts with people willing to listen. Thank you for listening to mine.